Welcome to the Real Situation Podcast. I am your host, Jason Campbell, and this is our inaugural episode. And it is
Mhm.
so fitting that our inaugural guest is Edward Buchanan. Hello, Edward Buchanan. Edward is one of my dearest, and there's a whole backstory audience with Edward and I surrounding this podcast. We'll get into it possibly in this podcast or another time. But Edward, it makes absolute perfect sense that you are the first guest on this podcast, and welcome.
Thank you very much. It couldn't have been any other way.
Well, I thank you for taking time out of your crazy, and I will say absolute
I know,
crazy schedule,
I know.
to participate in this podcast. But I do appreciate it. And also, Edward, I would be remiss if I didn't, to really give a shout out to your beautiful, amazing
Hmm.
mom, who I had the privilege of spending some time with in her lifetime. And so I'm so sorry to hear that your mom has passed, and I know that you've also been dealing with that along
Yeah.
with like a stacked workload right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's heavy, but we have to take our time, we have to make our peace as we can do. And she would not want me not doing what I love to do. So I'm here to do that. And that's why I've been so busy. But we're gonna figure that out. We're gonna figure
Absolutely.
it
And we
out.
know that she was one of your biggest champion, if not your biggest champion. So you are sitting in a seat in a role that she completely supported and loved you in. So that was a life well lived, and a wonderful son she has a result of it. Okay, so let's dive into the Edward resume here. I've known Edward.
Mhm.
Full disclosure to the audience, Edward is one of my closest friends. We have known each other for more than 30 years, so I know a lot of this. I know a lot of this backstory about Edward, but there are also things that I don't know about Edward, and particularly, we're going to be talking about this new era, this new profile in Edward's world, and there's a lot for me to discover and a lot to learn. So, though you're one of my closest friends, I look forward to delving into this and to learning some new things about your evolution and about your development. But before we get into that, let's give the people a little resume. Let's give them a little background. So Edward Buchanan is an American fashion designer, born in Ohio, and has lived in Milan. I don't know how you have lived in that place for over 30 years or 20 plus years. You have lived in
30
the
plus years,
in
yeah.
Milan, so you're Milan
Three
based.
decades.
Hello.
3 decades.
You studied at Columbus College of Art and Design and Parsons School of Design, building a foundation that would launch an international career. Edward began as a visual merchandiser at The Gap and Armani Exchange, and he later went on to be the first design director of Bottega Veneta from 1996 to 2000, designing the first ready to wear collection for that house in a very pivotal time in shaping the identity of Bottega Veneta that it currently has. Edward recently, which is going to be a part of this conversation, Edward recently appeared in the Bottega Veneta 2025 campaign, Craft is Our Language, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the brand's signature intricato leather weave and recognizing his past contribution and work to the house. And it was so fierce to see it. Edward is also the entrepreneur behind knitwear lines La Flèche and San Savino Say, and he is also currently the Italian fashion director for Perfect Magazine. I give you Edward Buchanan. So, Edward, please, and we know that in that resume there are tons more. You're a properly global executive in this business of fashion for the last 30 years. You're well-known personality, you're well-known talent, but somehow in this age, Edward, you have completely elevated your profile. I feel that you're seen differently than you were over the last 30 years. And I want to delve into this. I want to delve into this reclaiming of a legacy in fashion, which is how I've seen this chapter of yours. Okay, so let's get
Mm.
into it, Edward. Okay, in the last year, you've graced multiple magazine covers. You've secured a poignant Bottega Veneta
Oh.
campaign that marks a full circle moment. You serve as judge and jury on multiple panels, and you've also been rewarded with plummy consulting gigs during this period. Now, when you look back at the constellation of achievements, particularly around this era, how did this all come about? Was this by design? Was it by strategy? Was it by divine intervention? Like,
Mm.
what has happened in the last year that I
Mm.
see you absolutely everywhere over the fashion landscape?
Wow, thank you for that introduction, Jason. It's like when you hear the when you hear the story, at times it's kind of like, wow, is that me? We're talking about me. But you're absolutely right, and we often talk about this, and I have to say, well, there's two things I have to say. Um, the importance of storytelling is huge. And this is not all happening as a result just of the storytelling, but I use that to start out as a lead because um, when I was working at Bottega, for instance, and in any of the other things that I did at that time, it was pre-digital. So, a lot of these things lay and rest, and move on. And as the companies change, as the CEOs change, as the creative directors change, those stories that were built, in the past often get shelved away. Now, this doesn't always happen to other creative directors, maybe that are not Black and brown. But we find ourselves in the position of working in this industry where the work and the history and the let's say the building blocks that we have put into place are often overlooked. Is that by choice? Is that not by choice? But what ended up happening with me in this period is that people started to kind of pay attention, yes, to Bottega Veneta as a house, but they were wondering, like, what is this house? How did it start? Where did it come from? And specifically, I have to say, Luke Leach from American Vogue, who I know very well, who also lives in Milan, wrote this story. And the story was really about your first job. So, it wasn't really like a comprehensive story of Bottega Veneta, but he was like, Edward, what was your first job? And I was like, my first real job was Bottega Veneta, and he wrote this story. And Jason, you saw what
Yes,
happened. It was
yes.
so many people that didn't know that story, so many people that young, just not just young Black and brown people, but people in general that didn't know that history, they didn't know who I was, were able to see that and read that story. And they were also able to relate to someone that looked like them as reflection. So that's why I led with, telling these stories gives so many people the opportunity to understand that, there was a past and it was occupied by a person that potentially looks like them, and that was me. With that said, I also work in the editorial space, and this is something that's in the last 5 years, which is new to me. And working in the editorial space, as opposed to behind the scenes, all of a sudden I'm in the front. Um, these are people that I know that I've worked with for all of my career. I have the access. I know the designers. I know the stylists. So when you're put, in the face of, just show going, meeting, greeting, seeing, talking to, having access, being able to immediately get inside, that also puts me in another space. It puts me in a space where, and you know this very well, there are very few of us that are sitting in those seats, and especially in the front row seats. So um, it puts me in the position to, yes, be visible, be vocal, and have people note that. So I think a combination of those things crossing somehow pivoted me into this position of, yes, of authority, but I think it was curiosity. I speak about fashion, and I speak about fashion as a fashion designer, having the history in design, still designing every day. So when it's not necessarily about critique, but when I'm talking about fashion, it comes from the perspective that I know how those things are made, so I can talk about craft, I can talk about shape, I can talk about construction, I can talk about a lot of things that not necessarily an editor um, or even sometimes a journalist would really know about. So I think that serves me being in this position, and I think that it gave me a face that I didn't even know I had, to be perfectly honest.
I think that is so fascinating. You've identified that your contribution to Bottega Veneta may not have been as pronounced or broadcasted because the technology, the tools weren't there. That's not how it wasn't there. And
Huh.
then you then stepped into this very visible editorial space, something that actually you've never done before, something you've never
Never.
done before. But somehow the marriage of those two roles as a designer and now as an editor, you are somehow able to expose your design acumen in a way that you was never able to do so working behind the scenes. You're able to
Yeah.
talk about designers, you're able to talk about trends, you're able to talk about movements in a way that has greater authority than say another talent. But it's funny because in many ways I saw that Edward as like, okay, here is this black man having to do more work in order to get the recognition.
That part. That part. That
Like
part.
in
Well,
order to get
Jason, you know the story. You know the story. I mean, we have to be very transparent here. I mean, you know the story. It's not, I mean, I've been working in this industry. We talk about, the career and our careers and working in this space. It has never been just about stability and making money and saving. It is always like next season, I don't know if I'm going to have this job. I don't know if I'm going to have this consulting. Where's the rent coming from? So there's never. I'm. It's with full transparency. My career has not been parallel. My career has been up and down and up and down, and you know occupying many spaces, taking on many jobs was always about survival to me. And for me, it was necessary to survive. It wasn't just, that I wanted to do all of these things. I never had the desire necessarily to really work in the editorial space. I didn't know I had it in me. I was just a designer, and I love design. And I always, even as a young creative, wanted to just do that job because I thought that that was my job. Um, I had to expand my possibilities. I had to. No one was running after me, attempting after Bottega Veneta, attempting to give me the helm of another house. No one was chasing me down to be a consultant. I had to dig. I had to dig.
But Edward, what does that say about the industry ultimately? Now, in this moment, you are a fashion darling. And well, here's the thing: I need to inform this audience. By the way, I've known this guy for 30 years. Edward, you are loved universally in fashion. You know everyone. You've always known everyone in all the cities that matter, in all the roles that matter. You've been a very well liked, very well loved person in this industry for a very long time, but still yet you were not assigned a lot of
No.
those roles that you were qualified for, but somehow now I feel like there's a discovery around you. Like you've
Yeah.
laid the
Yeah.
groundwork for 30 years, but somehow you're now being discovered. Please delve into that for me.
Yeah, well, you know me very well, and you know that there's always been a lot of diplomacy in the way that I navigate spaces, and it hasn't always been to my advantage, because I was raised very well, and I don't like to, I don't like to like, you know,
Self promote.
I'm not a self promoter. I'm not. And I've talked about this with a lot of people. I'm just, I've always been, this kind of, I call myself the designer's designer. I really am. And it was always about craft from the inside out. And I just wanted to do those things. And at a certain point, I realized I really want to do those things. I want to, elevate within the workspace, but I'm not getting this opportunity. It's not that I'm not approaching to get the opportunity. I've had numerous agents and executive headhunters, and I have the meetings. They contact me because I have my resume is just stacked. It's like a tree with a lot of lines on the neck. You know what I mean? Those lines, I have those lines, but the opportunity just wasn't coming. So it's kind of like invention. I had to. It's almost like in the beginning stages after Bottega Veneta, Jason. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do because no one was coming to me. So I had to kind of reinvent myself as a specialist in knitwear. I didn't just become a knitwear designer just by trade. I learned
Right.
knitwear and I learned the technical aspects of knitwear, but I had to brand myself
Mm.
as a knitwear designer. It
A
wasn't like they just said,
specialist.
"Oh, I had to brand myself so that people could see that, oh, okay, maybe this guy can work, on the internal structures of what we're doing here." So it's always been about, make it happen to survive. Make it happen to survive. And I'm now living a moment where I'm able to enjoy what I do. I'm able to still continue to do what I love to do. And then there's some extra as well.
Right. Now, if we're really putting the microscope on the industry, based on what you have observed in this period of time, based on the doors that have opened up to you that previously weren't, what kind of observations have you made about that? Like doors that they didn't see you before, but then now all of a sudden doors are being flung open and you're being ushered in. What detail those sort of things for me?
Well, yeah, I mean, uh, access is a funny thing, and
Mm,
I think even not so long ago, prior to maybe even being in the Bottega Veneta campaign, um, a lot of boldface names wouldn't have even given me the time of day.
mm,
And while they see me sitting next to them at fashion shows or you know running into them in a luxury showroom, all of a sudden it's like, oh, he's invited in this space, so maybe it's okay for us to like him or to have some have some exchange with him as well. And this is the fashion space, and that's the reality of what I'm saying. So I've always been very level-headed, and I see people for exactly who and what they are. I'm there to do a job,
mm.
and I am there to view and learn and operate. My work for the editorial space is for Perfect Magazine. I know what the magazine is. I know what the magazine is. I know what my job for the magazine is to do within those spaces, and that's what I'm there to do. So, but you're very right. It's not always clean, and these are people that I know for many years, that I've seen for many
Yes.
years, that have come into the showrooms to see my collection. These are people that I properly know, um, but they haven't always been there, standing there with open arms in other
Mm.
situations.
Well, I
Not at
appreciate
all.
you speaking candidly about this because I feel that in fashion there's so much sanitization around when it comes to speaking honestly about the state of affairs, the state of
Mm,
treatment, the state of conduct, behavior, and all of those sort of things. So I appreciate that candor for sure, for sure. But
mm.
now that you're in some of those rooms, do you feel a responsibility for bringing in others along with you? How are you operating differently than those who were in those spaces didn't with you?
Sure. I always feel responsibility, and I think that you know, as a black male figure, let's say, working in the Italian space for such a long time, I've always made it my responsibility to reach out, and that's just through my mentoring programs that I work in, through working with Afro Fashion Association. I know what that it's like to be in that position because that was me. So I didn't necessarily have, you know, a slew of mentors that looked like me that I could, kind of reach out to and follow. There were very few um, in the time that I was coming up. So, I know how important that is to be able to, it's not, it's even just a conversation. It's like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? How did you navigate that space? What kind of resume do I need to, there are these, it's kind of like these kind of formal and informal ways to understand how we as Black people, as Black creatives, can enter the industry. And one of the most important things, Jason, and this is the thing that I constantly tell people, is that I don't think they're ever gonna really fully give anything to us. We have to really focus and concentrate on creating it ourselves. And when we created ourselves, which takes much longer, when we created ourselves with the intent to create it ourselves and have our names on the door, then that's ownership. So my role now, you know, let's say as a senior creative working in this space, is to attempt to teach people the importance of ownership. It's the only way that I'm here today. It's the only way that I survived. I as a consultant working in these spaces, it was always my business. My collections were always my business that had to be managed. I don't know if I could have done it the other way. No one was there, Jason. They weren't saying you do this. You're the creative director. So our only way forward was to just fucking figure it out.
Edward, I love that you continue to talk about race. Even at a time, and I don't know if you would agree, but I feel that the racial conversation, it was the fever, the momentum, back when the reckoning took place in the 2020s with the George Floyd and all those sort of things. The momentum behind, I felt that was like our time to make changes in this industry. But since then, I dare say, we've been radically bullied back into our hovels, and in many ways, no one wants to hear any racial conversation at all. So I love that you keep pushing forward. You have not let up on that at all. Why have you stayed on message even when the climate is, let's be honest, tired of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, by avoiding that conversation would somehow deny myself of who I am, what I am. This is the struggle that we've always had in this space, and that others are having in this space. So I couldn't deny that I'm a Black man working in an industry that doesn't always want me invited to the same spaces that they are. And I'm a Black male, which is still a male. Imagine being a Black woman, working in this space, so it's you're absolutely right. There was this moment where we thought, oh, wow, oh my gosh, they're ushering us in, they're giving us opportunity, they're paying us well. Um, well, here we are, let's go. You know what I mean? Like rolling, we're just gonna
Yes.
roll, and all of a sudden it was like snatch, it's snatched. But you listen, I always say this as well. I think that the shift, the work that we do within fashion is obviously informed by the global political state of the world and what's happening around us. And I dare say that, our shift and slide into um, very uncomfortable um, political states. I think that has a lot to do with, how people are really responding because these are large corporations, moneyed corporations, that don't always politically swing in the same direction that we do. And I think that they have the upper hand. And when they say, we want to do away with D&I, they're going to do away with D&I. And you know, those are laws and terms that protect us or protected us within the space. So I do think that that has a lot to do with it. And you feel it. You feel it sometimes in small ways. You feel it in the casting
the shift of castings, you know, from a moment after the 2000s when it was like, oh my gosh, we saw, you know, Black African,
Plethora.
we saw everything, you know, they were all
Yes.
there and they were celebrated, and then all of a sudden, you know, even this season, you know, you're seeing shows that have like, you know, three models of color. So it's not a mystery to me after so many years seeing this shift once again. Everything is 360. It always comes back around, you know?
And we were talking about responsibility before, and you expressed that you felt a certain responsibility in operating accordingly. But in many ways, do you feel that now, with your ascent, that you are now part of the gatekeeping, i.e., meaning that you're part of the decision making in terms of who enters certain spaces, who gets certain opportunities. I guess I'm looking more closely at your judge and jury roles on the different
Yeah,
panels for like yeah and Zoldano I could put
1000%.
yeah, I could butcher some names, and also on the panel for
Yeah.
the fashion weeks. Like I feel that
Mm.
you're in a place right now, like really where you get to open doors, close doors, determine who enter and who doesn't. How have you sort of inhabited that role, and how is it different than, say, the other players that presently occupy that space or occupy that space before?
I would say it's important for me to occupy those spaces, and I'd say it's even more important to invite others into those spaces to assist in making those decisions. Because if you're not inclusive on the inside, then you're never going to be inclusive on the outside. So when these roles, you know, when these roles are offered for YER or for any other, let's say, committee, fashion committee, if those tables are not diverse, what are we really doing here? We know how this is, Jason. You know, you have a table full of white judges 99.9% of the time, you're going to have a result which is a white winner, you know? So I've been in these spaces, and when I'm at those tables, I open my mouth. It's like, okay, guys, but like, you know, we're looking for talent, you know, we're judging talent here, you know? But, you know, we cannot deny the fact that disadvantaged creatives like women, black, brown, you know, these are not the first winners. These are not the first ones that they choose. So if I'm in that space and it's happened many times, if I'm in that space, I'm saying, why are we ignoring this talent here?
Mm,
Why are we not paying attention to this talent here? Why are we not paying attention to the fact that this talent didn't have the same education as this one? They
right.
weren't elevated within the system of fashion education. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the opportunity. But when you really look at what they're doing is incredible. So we have to look deeper. You have to dive deeper, and you have to challenge also the others on that table because they're not going to pay attention. They really don't. They don't pay attention to it. It happens in the editorial space. It happens in the judging space. It happens all the time, you know? So you always feel like you're, you know, I've been called Edward, you're pesante, or Edward, you know, why are we always talking about race? Or why, you know, I live in Italy, you know, it just happens over and over again. And it's like, no, you know, they didn't win because, you know, just because they're white, but they won because they were talented. But it's not so, Jason.
But also another recognition about your efforts is that in spite of all that is sort of, in spite of all the tide that is against, let's say, our community, you still remain optimistic. Where the hell is this optimism coming from? Like, what crevices are you looking in that you're
Mm,
finding that optimism? Because in many ways, Edward, let's be clear here. Let's be transparent. You know, a lot of our community, in terms of like the seasoned veteran fashion players, there is so much jadedness around
Yeah.
cynicism around where we are. We lived the golden years of fashion and knew was the golden years of fashion in spite of all the issues, the poor treatment, the racism. There were so many issues during that time. But what we cannot deny is that there was hyper creativity, there was hyper
Mm.
talent. You felt that you were part of a credible movement, that there were things really percolating that was beneficial, that was going to be lasting. I don't necessarily feel the same about this era. It feels like a money grab. It feels disposable. It feels over commercialized. There's so much about it that is inauthentic, but yet you still hold the baton, to want to pass on to that next generation with enthusiasm, with all the things. Why do you remain like this?
That's a good question. I'm, I don't know. You know me. I'm an optimist, you know? I really am. I'm an honest optimist, I've never been awarded anything, Jason Campbell. I've never been awarded anything. I've never been on the list. I've never been, the Louis Vuitton. I've never been, my come up was not based on being awarded. I didn't get anything, you know?
Fair
And
enough.
and and so I
Well, the
know.
strange thing is, you were rewarded as a great friend, not to only myself, but to many, and I could name names, I have the list, to many very, very, very bold-faced talents in this industry, a lot of famous designers, a lot of very known people. So there's that. I have to underscore
Yeah,
that.
and once again, not always to my advantage, you know.
Oftentimes to
But
your disadvantage.
oftentimes to my disadvantage. But in the face of my love for the work that I do and my investment in my career and in my survival, um, I just don't see another way. I don't know. I really don't. I think that I don't know. Maybe it's much bigger than me, Jason. I don't know.
Okay.
I really do. I just think that it doesn't whew, I don't have to be paid to be compassionate. I don't have to be paid to be ethical. You know what I mean?
Mm.
These are not there's no exchange and there's no monetary exchange, I think, for me working in that space because when I see a young creative or for that matter, anything, I see a young model and they're like, they have this eyes and this thirst, and you're just like, if I can help you in any way, I'm gonna be there. I don't know you from anyone else, but I know where you are and I know the
Mm.
issues that you're having, so I can really speak for that. And I think that that's important. Sometimes it's just saying, show up earlier, present yourself in this way. There's various ways to kind of navigate this space in a way where we can attempt to get through, It's not a solution, but in order to really resolve, we have to share the information.
Well, one question that I failed to ask earlier: what did Louise Trotter see, not just in you, but yes, saw in your contribution that all the other designers who had helmed Bottega Veneta between you and her did not? Can you?
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. No, no, shortly after Louise started, she sent me a message, and we weren't friends. I knew Louise because I was working in the editorial space, so I knew the work that she'd done in the past, and she had no reason to contact me, and she did, and she reached out, and that is fucking stand up, and I loved that because she reached out to me, and she was like, Edward, you were the first, Jason, who said that to me? Who's reached
No
out
one.
to me and said that. And so Louise and Leo, the CEO, and Thierry, who was director of communications, were really on board with telling this story as it was written. It's not a story that is made up. So if you're ignoring the fact that I existed within that story, then you're telling a lie. And many magazines and many fashion publications have written me out of that story. Um, Knowing very well, I mean, these are fashion journals that report every day that were there when I was there. Okay?
See,
So, so that she was so confident in the work that she wanted to do and knew the importance of what I did and how it assisted in her arriving there today was a beautiful thing. And that's how the campaign and everything happened. You know, I mean, they really reached out.
I think the point that you note should not be breezed over. The point that you noted about those journalists having been there, they witnessed it. It's not as though, and I could also
Mm,
list off those journalists who had been there all that time. And you're absolutely right. That's why this conversation about reclaiming your legacy is so seminal and important, is because it really was almost purposefully it was almost purposely erased because there were
mm.
witnesses. There were witnesses then, and there are witnesses now. So yeah, that's a really important detail, that there was no accident in here. It's not as though Bottega Veneta
No,
have not been written about, let's say ad nauseum over the last 30 plus years, but somehow that inaugural chapter got omitted from the conversation and from the discussion, after that. Why is that?
yeah.
That really does beg the
Well,
question.
it does. And I want to talk about? I want to talk about Eric Wright. I want to talk about Eric Wright because
Oh,
a lot
oh
of people
yes,
a lot
yes.
of people don't know who Eric Wright is, you know?
Please tell the audience. Please tell the
I
audience.
mean, Eric Wright
Okay.
was the one that I wanted to be, you know? Eric Wright was the right and the left hand creative at Fendi and at Chanel under Karl Lagerfeld
Okay.
for years.
For years.
The chicest, most talented creative that you ever want to meet, you know? And he looked like us. And who's talking about
Hmm?
Eric Wright?
No one talks.
Where's the
Okay.
story? Where's the elevation? Where's the job? You know, Eric Wright is still in existence, you know? I am a fan, you know? I'm not a fan of anyone, you know?
Okay.
But that is the type of creative like him, like Andre Walker, like
Okay.
Byron Lars. These are all the
Okay.
creatives that yes, I admired because they looked like me.
Okay.
And these are also the creatives that don't necessarily get ushered into these companies to continue working. You know, the survival is real, I think, for all of us, you know? So you can't deny the fact that those stories and the vast majority of those stories um, end up falling in the laps of people that look like us. So,
100%. 100%. But now in this age, now that you're in the consulting rooms,
mm.
what perspective do you feel, what value do you feel you're bringing to those spaces that, say, someone who doesn't look like you is bringing into those conversations that was say missing before?
Well, I mean, in the creative space, I bring design, I bring insight, I bring taste. I'm there to do my job. You know what I mean? I work under many different creative directors, and because it's what I'm passionate about and it's what I know how to do. But because I work in so many different spaces, when I work in this space, I have to think in this way based on the creative director. I have to respond in this way, and that's the beauty of it. But then I go over to this space here and I have to respond in this way. They do very different things, but you better believe that I'm going to learn all about what happens on the right over here and that informs the right, and I'm going to learn all about what happens over in the left and inform about the left. So I can work in different spaces, have different styles, have different techniques, but I'm going to bring 1000% what I know and bring my capacity and my idea to design to make that a success. It's almost like, the idea of consultants are like, these kind of shadow designers, I'm there to make the creative director look fantastic. That's what I
Fair
do.
enough. Is there no resentment? For example, we have friends in common, very well-known designers who become incredibly wealthy, who become incredibly
Mm.
recognized in their careers in this industry. In my conversation with you, I'm feeling that Edward Buchanan is incredibly talented, is incredibly positive and optimistic, but is doing the very most.
No, that's a good point. No, listen, the only thing that I have to say, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, the only resentment that I have within my workspace is that my brands were not more successful than they were. Because working on those brands, whether it be La Flèche or Sansevino Say, they were kind of cult brands, and but I didn't get the support that others got
Right,
doing
right.
those things on my own. I didn't get the structural support. I didn't get the editorial support. I had the manufacturing, I had the ideas, but I was never really supported in those spaces doing those things on my own. And you can, is taste really subjective? I know that what I was doing was good, and there's no question about it. And I know that those things were also can be related to timing and what's happening in the time. But a lot of those people that were jumping over through hoops to make sure that those people who were my colleagues, who were much younger than I, who and sometimes less skilled than I, they were jumping through hoops to make sure that those people were a success. They were not jumping through hoops. They
They
were
were
not
not
jumping
jumping
through.
boots to do the same
No.
for you. But what I must say that I commend you on is when you recognize at a time that your brand is a calling card for your consultancies and
Yeah.
for other things. If it just had to become that, you still needed your
Yeah.
autonomy, you still needed ownership and authorship. But you recognize that that ownership and authorship can be the calling card for working elsewhere where you could actually be paid. I think that was a very smart recognition. And while that was in the air, that was in the climate, you didn't have to continue to do your brands, but you recognize like what that did for your greater goal as to
Yeah.
work as a designer. And
Mm.
I thought that was a strategic move that ultimately paid off very well for you.
Something I had to learn. I mean, it wasn't the idea at all. It wasn't that wasn't a part of the plan, but I think that, how we progress within the spaces that we occupy, it's really there's those are learning curves, and it
100%.
benefited me.
And look at the learning curve that you're working with even at this stage of life. As we said, we started out this conversation by saying that you were not interested in being a multi hyphenate. You were interested in you were a designer.
Right.
I'm
Like a
a fashion
designer.
designer, but here you are as a multi hyphenate, and I dare say finding probably the greatest success that you have in this industry by having these
I know.
multi
It's
roles.
wild. It's
Now,
wild.
how do you view the industry differently now by the vantage that you currently have? Oh, wait. Let me preface this by feeding something else. It was very
Hmm.
interesting to me recently. I think it was several months ago, last year sometime. You made a post. We haven't discussed this actually. You made a post. I thought it was very
Hmm.
interesting. You made a post about essentially calling for the industry to be kinder to each other. I thought that was
Mm.
actually kind of curious. I thought that was you were stepping into a position as I don't know, like the conscience, let's say, like the
Mm.
conscience of the industry. You were calling for certain approach to be kinder and nicer to each other. what I have mixed feelings about that. So I want to kind of
Yeah,
better understand why you felt compelled to express that sentiment, why you felt that you were the one to express it, and ultimately what you meant about, in many ways, I kind of took that as like, is he saying that there shouldn't be critical thinking? Like we can't speak
mm,
honestly?
mm,
Is it part of
right,
the problem in this industry? Is that everyone is
yeah,
so sanitized and no one can speak, honestly because they need to preserve their jobs or whatever the case may be? What happened to critical thinking? So
right.
break this down for me. I thought that was interesting, and they did eat you up in the comments.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that point, and there was a eating, but there's also supporting, and that, let me explain this. That comment came from a very honest place, um, and the honesty that let's say poll voted that comment was really in protection of creatives, as I am a creative, and hear me out on this one. What I think is that working in this space is a privilege. It's a privilege, and everyone doesn't have access. Everyone does not have access to these rooms. Fashion shows used to be industry space where buyers and journalists were offered that space in order to promote and build and purchase these collections. So that by making fashion more democratic in a way, you open yourself up to criticism that's not always informed criticism. And this is a very important point. You can speak on fashion because you know the make, you know the history, you know the manufacturing, you know what a dirndl skirt was, period, about the world in order to critique the world. Everyone has the right to say anything they fucking want about fashion. But when you start to, from your screen, say, I don't like that because I don't like black, it starts to get tricky. It starts to get a little tricky. You know what I mean?
I hear you.
How can you say, oh my God, it fits so bad when you haven't really tried it on, So that you can even say, but you can't attack that creative based on that. Your angry attacks on these individuals. I mean, Jason, we talk about this all the time. Like, we are all going batshit crazy. You know what I mean? Like, we are, we're like disintegrating. You know what I mean? Mental health is a real thing. So,
Real.
it is. And I think that why? Why do we have to do that? It was very interesting. Vanessa Friedman contacted me. I had conversations with everyone because everyone was kind of feeling this conversation. Everyone was feeling the same thing that I was saying, but no one said it. No one was saying it, Jason, because there's fear of this. And, I don't have any, there's nothing for me to fear in terms of how I use my voice to express how I'm feeling working in this space. And I think that I would be irresponsible not
Mm.
to speak on the behalf, if I have to, of others that are like me that work in this space. And it was a storm when that happened. But at the end of the day, it was like kind of like the delivery of that was one way, but my intention was really to say, guys, like, chill out here. You can say whatever you want, but like, let's learn the fashion history. Let's learn the fabrication. Let's
Mm.
learn these things, and then let's critique them with intelligence. Let's critique them with substance. Let's not just like throw out, like insults,
Hmm.
on the collection, and then further on the designer because you don't know. And also, let's give creatives a bit more time. You know what I mean? Everything is light speed. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
you come off with one collection and they're already like, get the fuck out of here. But you haven't had time to develop, you haven't had time to learn the space. So there's a lot of conversations that revolve around it. But yeah, that happened. That
It's funny
happened, girl.
we never had a conversation
Yeah,
about it.
it's
No,
true.
yeah, I thought it was
True.
I thought it was interesting, and I'm glad to delve into with you in this conversation, and I hear you, and I absolutely hear
Yeah.
you. Now, okay, we have perspective. We're at a certain age. And with all that you've learned, especially with all the new information that has percolated in this last year or so, if you were to look back and tell your 15-year-old self, your 18-year-old self, you're about to, you're at the advent of university or whatever, is there anything that you would tell yourself with all that you've learned, the good, the bad, the ugly, the all the things? Is there something that you would say with the perspective that you have now that you would inform your younger self?
Whoa. Um, I would. I'm. I live my life very, very much based on no regrets. You know what I mean? I really do. It's kind of like, I've made mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I continue to make mistakes. Um, mm, I the one thing that I would reflect on, uh, directed at my younger self, is money management.
Hallelujah.
Money management, Jason Campbell. Managing money. We didn't, what we talk about this, it wasn't something that we learned. And I was out buying Junior Gautier when I should have been paying rent. I was out, I was out buying, garments when I should have been investing, and we don't come from, historical or family wealth, and there was no protection for me. But I didn't know what that meant. I was making money after my college years, and it all went to what? It all went where?
The big question mark, the big
Yeah.
question mark. Okay, now that we're looking at 2026 and all that you've experienced, does it feel like the culmination of a new beginning? Do you, and if it does feel like the culmination of a new beginning, is there anything that you're particularly hungry to endeavor into
Mm.
with this new energy, if you want to define it as that?
I always feel like, that this is something that I really talk about with my therapist, but I always feel like, every day that I'm being punked, that it could be, it could just in 3 seconds, be like pulled, the rug can be pulled. They're like, psych, you're not getting this opportunity. You know what I mean? It's just the reality, because my career and the trajectory of my career has always been that. So I never felt protected. I never felt stable. I never felt stable. I'm slowly understanding that there's a stability. I bought property. There's a stability to my life and to my career. But I'm just always really afraid that, those opportunities and that we're talking about can all of a sudden disappear. So, which is it's kind of scary in a way that I feel that way after working so long, and have some type of celebration in the work that I've done. But I just think that that's our reality, and we're artists and creatives of a certain generation that didn't have that chance to be, stable in our early 30s. You know what I mean? We didn't have the chance to, um, there was no protection, So I gotta work on that, but going forward, I'm still having a great time, working in different spaces. I really am. I need to do less, and I can manage now to be able to do less and still survive in the way that I want to. Um, I'm opening up a space, which is a community center, which is going to be somehow a default artist in residence for young Black and Brown creatives, which is in Milan, which is a space that is
Amazing.
not, yeah, and I'll have my office, but this space is going to be used so that when I can invite those creatives or chefs or gallerists or whatever they be, from the disadvantaged communities, when I can invite them in, to operate within that space, they have no cost. So I'm going to work with, industry organizations in order to get funding for these things. So that's the big picture for me. The big picture for me will shift into to doing things and taking on roles like that where I can help others in that space. And I like the idea of operating a space that I can call my own, that people can come in and use as a creative hub. So I find that more somehow intriguing now than the idea that I will be designing for the next 20 years. I don't necessarily see that as a thing, but never say never. Who knows?
Well, if the dream was ever deferred, and let's say that it was at one time, we have to say now that there has been a reclaim of that
Mhm.
legacy, and it is absolutely beautiful to see, and it could not happen to a more deserving individual. So this is a wonderful, wonderful development, Edward, and I think this is, there's so many lessons in this that we can all learn by about the power of reinvention. Is it who said it? Who said it? Was I think it was Bevy Smith. It gets better later.
It gets better. It gets greater later.
It gets greater.
It, it gets greater later. True story. True story hat.
And
It's so funny. Last night. I was at the Bottega Veneta show, which was last night, and I was sitting next to Lauren Hutton and Lauren Hill, both
uh-huh.
who I have in my period, in my time, I have history with
History.
both of them. So it was just things turn around. You know what I mean? They come back, and yeah, it's beautiful to still be in that
Well, it
in
is
that
great to
era.
see you in this season. I love celebrating it, and I appreciate your time here on the podcast. Thank you very much, Edward Buchanan.
Thank
Wonderful, wonderful.
you. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, guys. Thank you.